I want to tell you a tale of another Unitarian Universalist church and nurturing community. When Maureen and I moved to Eugene in 2004, the UU Church was a beautiful but small building nestled in the woods in the South Hills. We could often watch deer through the floor-to-ceiling windows in the sanctuary, but it was too small. The congregation had outgrown the space. We had 2 services every Sunday. We considered alternatives, add on or tear down and rebuild. Neither was practical. In addition, its isolation in a well-to-do neighborhood seemed to mock our commitment to social justice. Finally, the congregation opted to relocate closer to the center of town. It was painful to leave the building, and we feared it might be torn down and replaced with condos, but to our relief, we sold it to a Buddhist group who kept it just as it was. In the meantime, we looked for a new location. After exploring several options, we purchased a Scottish Rite temple on the west side of downtown. It was a dark, nearly windowless building with lots of small rooms and a large meeting space with a low ceiling panel hiding utilities. We quickly dubbed it the BUB, Butt Ugly Church Building. But over the next 2 years, something nearly miraculous happened. To save money, we put congregants to work. Turns out there are tasks for every person, from teens to our most senior members. Anyone can swing a hammer to break down old sheetrock. We recycled everything we could. A group of women we called our strippers removed the cover from hundreds of pounds of copper wire, and we got thousands for the metal we sold. We chipped the mortar off the bricks from the old boiler chimney and entryway. There's a market for used brick. Gardeners got to work on landscaping. It turned out the assembly space had gorgeous laminated beams arching over it, but they were covered in paint. Hundreds of hours of scraping and sanding restored them. We put in over 40 skylights. Some of us had carpentry skills, and we developed new talents. For example, I now know how to operate a jackhammer and run a scissor lift, skills I have a hard time applying currently. Someone came in early to make coffee, and food appeared for lunches and snacks. We used professionals when needed. The first task was to remove the asbestos from the building. The crew in hazmat suits started on a hot August day. It turned out there was far more asbestos than the estimate we had been given. When they were provided with ice water and snacks, the foreman said he would bill us only for the original estimate. An architect designed large hanging panels to absorb sound in the sanctuary and worked on the project for months for minimal pay. A group from the Salem UU Church came down to help out a few times. Even before we were finished, we strengthened our social justice program by putting 3 Conestoga tiny houses in our parking lot for the homeless. Throughout the process, several things happened. The BUB, the Butt Ugly Building, was transformed into the BUUB, our beautiful Unitarian Universalist building. The sanctuary is light and inviting. The RE classrooms are colorful, and there's a wonderful play area just outside. It's an inviting space. But more importantly, the sense of community and commitment in the congregation was strengthened. Working together for a common goal can work wonders, and it was an amazing experience to be part of it.
I got a sweet email in my inbox this week. A member of the ELM group, or End of Life Matters group, sent out an email asking if anyone was interested in going to the fancy new laundromat in town to do laundry and spend time together. I loved the idea. Wash the dog beds or the comforters or whatever, and hang out. What a great idea. Community can be built in all sorts of different ways. I've gotten to know my neighbors by saying hello, sure. But what's actually led to real get-to-know-you conversations? Often it's asking for help. I brought home a lawnmower that I could not lift out of my car alone. And so I asked Chad, who was parked in his car, just kind of hanging out in his car for a minute, and I walked up and I knocked on his windshield and I said, "Is there any way you could help me get my lawnmower out of my car?" And he said, "Sure." And, the task itself took about 30 seconds. We chatted for probably 15 minutes. It was lovely. The woman across the street needed someone to watch her cat, and she asked me. There was a 10-foot sapling in the space between our house and our neighbor's house, and I wasn't really sure whose property it was on. It was kind of interfering with the rose bushes. And I asked if he had any suggestions, and he came out with a chainsaw. And I said, "Thanks, I don't have a chainsaw." And he said, "No, but you have a me, and I have a chainsaw." And that interaction led to sharing books and baked goods when things were seriously locked down during COVID. Going past a neighbor's house during a drive-by graduation celebration for one of them led them to drop off their decorations for us to use for Mika's graduation celebration. And when Deesa's car got stuck in the snow and ice, 3 neighbors came over to help us push it out because clearly we were not making any progress with it. And so I brought them homemade cookies, and now we always say hello, and I know that if something happened, I would have more folks to count on and check in with. More broadly, organizations like Buy Nothing groups, or Rooster groups, or Queer Exchange lead to building community through the free exchange of goods and services. Everything from dinner for a tenuously housed family, to dog gates, to toddler clothes, to unwanted furniture gets passed around, building community in the process. I got my incredibly beloved cats, Flora and Liam, from Rooster when their former owner couldn't take care of them anymore. There are lots of other ways to build community through activities you enjoy. I know congregants who participate in square dancing, who play pickleball, who sing in community choirs. I know congregants who run for school board or other political offices, trying to make our communities better places. I know people who participate in our political systems in other ways, with drives to get out the vote on a particular issue or candidate. I know folks who join local volunteer organizations, or play in a band, or join the writing groups. I know folks from this congregation who feed the hungry and pack food for hope and bring meals for sheltering our neighbors. And many of you know me, and you know where I'm going with this. And so where else can you find intergenerational community that works to make our community a better place? Thank you. Exactly. Community is built in so many ways. In activities we enjoy, in activities we don't really enjoy, like cleaning up mouse poop, that are made way more fun by doing it with friends. Right, Louisa? In reaching out and saying hello, in shared values and experiences. But community is also built on deep sharing, on helping and allowing ourselves to be helped, in sharing our vulnerabilities. Like somebody else, Facebook reminded me of some important memories and milestones yesterday. First, it reminded me of a move 6 years ago from the home that I shared with my now ex-wife and our 4 children into the duplex that my girls and I lived in for more than 2 years. I hired movers to take care of the big furniture. My friends are no longer able to move pianos. But it was friends who carried the boxes. It was friends whose children decorated my new front sidewalk with drawings of flowers and unicorns. Friends who ate with me and drank wine and reminded me of my own continuing worth and value. In our reading today, John O'Donohue reminds us that when he thinks of beauty, I think of acts of such lovely kindness that have been done to me by people that cared for me in bleak, unsheltered times, or when I needed to be loved and minded. I dare say we all have bleak, unsheltered times like that. And it can be really hard to reach out. Somehow our culture of individualism, which is a really horrible trait of white supremacy culture, by the way, teaches us that it is somehow easier to go it alone, to do it myself, to not reveal vulnerability by asking for help. And then sometimes it can turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy because we don't ask for help, and then we feel bad when it doesn't appear. I wish we had a better culture where help appeared automatically. But unfortunately, I think individualism is so ingrained in our system that we don't want to violate people's privacy by asking if they need help. I have a horrible example of this that happened to me. On the 4th of July last year, I drove my daughter to her other mom's house to feed the cats. As I drove past Montevilla Park, I noticed a man sleeping on the sidewalk. When I picked her up again the next morning, I was concerned to see the same man lying on the sidewalk some 14 hours later. We stopped on the way back to the house to check on him. And here's the thing. I was afraid to try and wake him up because I was afraid that I was violating his privacy. Because if he was sleeping on the sidewalk, if that was the only place he had to sleep, how dare I bother him and somehow tell him that it wasn't okay to sleep on the sidewalk? As you may have guessed by now, he wasn't asleep. A man died on a sidewalk on 82nd Avenue in Portland, and it took at least 14 hours until someone stopped. It is hard to change the culture in big ways. Sally McCabe managed. Homelessness might be a little tougher of an issue. Homelessness will take a great deal of cultural change to fix. Somewhere at the intersection of affordable housing and mental health treatment and addiction treatment and building communities that value everyone, we could make huge differences, but it's not easy and it won't be easy. But we can begin by changing the culture in smaller ways. We can practice being vulnerable by asking people we already know for small things, like small favors. We can practice asking strangers for small things as we get braver. I had a great relationship with a former neighbor because she actually came over to borrow a cup of sugar. Who does that anymore? But it was awesome. For the 7 years I lived there, we traded eggs and cups of sugar and a cup of milk here and there, and we knew each other. I asked a neighbor to help me get a lawnmower out of a car. It could have taken 30 seconds, but it didn't. People want to help. It is in our nature to want to help. But it can be hard to ask, and it can be hard to offer unless you feel like the ask will be received. Sometimes it takes offering. When we were going through all this stuff with my partner Deese's parents, Ian and Leslie Healy asked if they could bring me dinner. I would never have asked, but they offered, and they delivered enough teriyaki chicken and rice and salad to feed us for days, and it was fabulous. And sometimes it takes a willingness to get deeply involved. Every one of you sitting in this building is making an effort towards meaning and connection just by being here. Some of you may have walked through the door for the first time today, seeking something, perhaps connection or meaning or comfort. Some of you are getting more and more used to this place, weighing its meaning in your life, not sure how deeply you want to get involved, but returning and returning again. Some of you have been coming for years, and you find this one of the central places in your life. You find purpose and meaning here. You give your time and your energy and your money. This is one of those places that offers connection, which is part of what creates joy and beauty in our lives. You all are in your own places. This may be your first time, or maybe you've been coming for a month and you have all the excitement of finding your place. You may have joined during COVID and may love our services but not know other people very well yet. You may have been coming for 30 years and run the Hope Food Program. You may have been involved in one aspect of the congregation and suddenly said yes to being the board moderator, and you might think that that was one of the best decisions you've ever made. Your relationship with this congregation will deepen with your actions. There are so many ways to get involved, but the general rule of thumb is that it takes diving into something to really feel like you belong. And that can be so hard for introverts especially. But if you find something you enjoy and are passionate about, your relationship with this place will only deepen. Come have a conversation with me, and we might find something that's a good fit. The other thing Facebook reminded me of today is that my graduation from seminary was 11 years ago this weekend. I had the privilege of giving the invocation prayer for dinner on the night before graduation, and I was reminded of the words I spoke. After expressing gratitude for our families and our teachers, I noted that we are grateful for each other, our classmates and colleagues, because we would not be who we are without each other. Our own transformations have been directly affected by their transformations. We have changed and grown separately and together, but always in relationship to one another, to those other loved ones in our lives, and to the Spirit of the Holy, which in the words of David Bamba, grabs us and will not let us go. Community, especially religious community, is created in relationship to one another. It means noticing one another, just like Sally McCabe, the smallest girl in the smallest grade, who noticed how people treated one another and then shared that noticing. It means building relationships because we don't grow in the same way in isolation. It is hard to grow in isolation, especially for our kids. Teachers and kids are struggling these days because while online learning has a definite place for those who need that for one reason or another, COVID was a giant experiment and the results were clear. Kids need to be around other kids. They need teachers who can see them and support their learning, not just math and reading, but relationships with others. Kids have gotten a little feral in not being able to play with other kids. For the most part, their social skills have receded and their mental health has too. Now, I know that thoughtful homeschooling can be a great option for some families, and that's not what I'm talking about. But the isolation that we experienced as a culture hurt. Of course, so did COVID. We did our best, and we hope that we never have to do the same thing again in the same way. As humans and as Unitarian Universalists, we grow in relationship. Relationships that are built on trust and interdependence, on asking and helping and growing together, on diving in and participating. Our third principle is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, because it is so much harder to grow spiritually in isolation. And so, my friends, let's risk vulnerability by asking for help. Let's try and notice when somebody might need some help. Let's notice when wildflowers appear that nobody planted, and let's cultivate interdependence. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.